Michael Cunningham, I'm going to ask you a question. The question is, do you believe the novel, that any novel is a chapter in the long history of the novel?
Yes, yes. And I think that is an excellent way of putting it. There is all this talk and always has been here in the US about the great American novel. And that has always struck me as ridiculous. Go ahead, write a novel that accounts for any country, certainly a country this large and this rife with transcendence and evil. I think of, well, every novel, certainly every good novel, not just by Americans, obviously, but the all of us who write novels are writing our own piece of the big novel that no
And
one, not even those brilliant among us, could write.
if you start thinking about the big novel, part of the tensions in the tradition we've inherited is between the idea of character and the idea of period or background or history or what's really going on in the world at the time the character lives. And as novelists, we move between, and I think your novel Day is a particularly good example of that, how there are two things almost at war in the novel. The idea of the characters are so strong, so large, and so much themselves. And yet, in the background, all the time comes very pressing certain crises going on in the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think of fiction as part of the historical record. If you wanted to know about 19th century Russia, you would read biographies and histories, but you would also read Tolstoy and Gogol and Chekhov because novels and novelists are the ones who record what it was like to actually be alive during the Crimean War or during the pandemic. And we are recording in ways I think no one else does the actual human experience of living through whatever moment in history your people are living through.
And I think this book deals with a question which could, I think, have real meaning for a novel, which is, if there's a property crisis and a rental crisis in a city,
Hmm.
then it affects deeply how people live. Not people who are on the margins, but people who seem to be almost moving towards the center. That suddenly
Hmm.
space, and a novel deals. All novels deal with domestic space. The idea of where
Yeah.
you sleep, how that works, the meaning of all that, the intimacy of all that. And I think that intimacy becomes affected by some large questions to do with real estate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you could say that the novel is where the domestic meets the global and the historical.
And
There. With that bit of wisdom, I think we're really pretty much done, right?
yes, except of course we haven't started to talk about
I
character.
know, I know,
And
I know,
so,
I know.
in other words, George Eliot, we take something like Middlemarch, that it's set with the coming of the railways, with the Great Reform
Right.
Act of 1832. But then you say, no, no, that's really not what it's about. And you start with Dorothea. And so we start with the idea, which is, again, it's a reasonably new idea in fiction, the gay brother.
The gay brother. I know, I know. Well, quickly on its way to being an old idea in fiction, but yeah.
And so, when you were writing A Home at the End of the World, there really weren't as many gay brothers, in life, indeed, or in fiction as there are now.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The gay brother is all over the place, and I guess if anything, I worry a little bit. It's already happening in television and the movies that the gay brother is on his way to being a sort of stock figure.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
like the black maid, like somebody who's in the picture but not really of the picture or central to the picture. And if the gay man is at the center, then it's a gay novel and it's treated as such.
And the whole idea of Robbie is that he's filled, nonetheless, no matter what happens to him, with hope. That, in other words, when he's about to get another apartment, even though it doesn't have a view, it almost does.
Yeah,
And the view, the whole sense of people desperately working against a real estate crisis, as a display of character, as a display of a sort of solidity of character.
sure, sure, sure. A novel set in contemporary New York, I think, can't really ignore the housing crisis. I'm speaking to you from a sixth floor walk up with air shaft views that, oh, I hope my landlords don't hear this, if it was not rent controlled, would be $2,500, which and who can afford that? But oh, just let's back to George Eliot for just a moment. Yes, the fact that the railroads aren't there yet is certainly not a central aspect of the book, but knowing that helps us understand how isolated those people are and how limited Dorothea's choices are, which will change the minute it's possible to get the hell out of Middlemarch without
Yeah.
without taking a dangerous 3-week journey in a coach. Um, and same with the fact that New York has become a city too expensive for anyone to live in. It's just part of the
Yes,
fact.
yes, and I think in Middlemarch, the arrival of the stethoscope, and you realize, ooh, I mean, what did they think was happening before they had the stethoscope?
Yeah.
And so, I think those objects do make sometimes an ironic difference in that the later readers will read. And but there is something almost perennial in we all there in every city now, I think, in the world, including probably North Korea, is the rock star, the faded, the person who did play the guitar, the person who
Mhm,
did have hope,
mhm,
the
mhm.
person who's getting older and sort of slightly fatter and is not ready to accept that this is over. And that
Yeah,
that figure of Dan in the book is, I think, is someone you can really work with.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just much more interested in people who tried and failed than I am in people who have succeeded. Not with all due respect to the successes of the world, I feel like they don't need me to write about them.
It's that's a very interesting idea, isn't it? That it's very hard to imagine a novel about a really successful rock star who became a poster boy, or indeed a real estate person who's living in some astonishing apartment that's costing a fortune that they can well afford.
Yeah,
These
yeah,
are not
yeah,
isn't that right?
yeah. I mean, what comes to mind is a Don DeLillo novel called Cosmopolis, which is about exactly that person. And
And
I
he's
love John. I have a John DeLillo tattoo, which I'm not going to show you. But I think of it as everything he does is fascinating. But one of his least successful novels, because this guy, it's the drama of the 1%, and it doesn't really resonate.
yeah, but in as much as it does work, it is that he's in search of a haircut,
I
which
know,
is a
I know, I know. And
nostalgic trip. I mean, in other words, he
it's a new
wants
haircut
something
every
back.
day. Yeah,
He wants something back from a childhood that's lost to him, and that it
yeah,
isn't as though he's ready to make the next deal or he's ready for happiness. No, he wants something very specific that is so tiny.
yeah, 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 yeah. You could certainly say that a novel like Cosmopolis is really about the fact that nobody is really getting what they want, even those who seem to be getting more than anyone could possibly want.
I wonder if you're conscious that in some of your work there is a mythic journey from the city into a sort of an Arcadia, a sort of lost place in the countryside that's sylvan, that's more dreamed of sometimes than actually visited, but is
Yeah,
an essential element in the dream life and therefore in the sort of sense of self that your characters have. And this is there from a home at the end of the world today.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's one of those things I think many of us who write experience, whereby if you write enough books, you begin to see, oh, I seem to have certain fixations on this or that or the other thing. Whereas with book number one or two, you wouldn't say that. But yeah, and I think it probably just stems from the time in which I grew up, which was the 1960s, in which during which we many of us just assumed that if not all of civilization, the cities would collapse, that it, it would all fall apart, and we would return to a sort of idealized agrarian world, albeit in our imaginations without floods, fires, and poxes that wipe out all the chickens. But yeah, I mean, I think it's neither more nor less than the sense of the world in which I grew up, coupled with the realization as I got a little older that, oh, oh, darlings, that's not going to happen. And we felt very sure it was going to happen, and then it didn't.
One of the other areas that I'm interested in is if you were to draw a history or attempt a history of gay life or gay sensibility in a certain period of time, which of course is an essential element in the changing ways of certain cities, from New York to Dublin to Reykjavik, that the
Right.
idea that gay men changed their lives and that gay life became a different thing. What I think is fascinating about Day, and I think it's part of your project, is that the ordinariness, that gay life moved from being alarming.
Yes.
And this, so we're talking about gay men being closeted and strange and untrustworthy, say 1950s,
Yeah.
moving down dark, mean streets into strange clubs, being arrested. And then we
Yeah.
have,
Yeah.
the rest of the movement. But in the figure of Robbie, you get a sort of, he's a sweet guy. He is not alarming. And there's nothing about him that requires liberation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, it depends on which country you find yourself in, because Russia to Nigeria to other countries, they are rolling it way, way, way back, and it's not only no longer all right to be gay, it's actually a punishable offense. But in this my world, our world, I can I'll just speak personally. At this point, I I wouldn't say that my sexuality, my homosexuality, was one of the five most important things you need to know about me. I'm not sure it would be one of the 10 most important things to know about me. And I do conversations and readings in places, like Tulsa, Oklahoma, Albuquerque, New Mexico, where if it comes up, I mention my husband. Yeah, so what? And and there's never any reaction. Now these are the people who come to readings in places like Oklahoma City and and New Mexico, but I can just say for me, there has been a huge, huge shift from my sense of myself as a teenager with a terrible secret to hide to myself as someone much older. I don't think of it as a secret at all.
So if you place this in a context of 500 years
Mm-hmm.
of the time, say, since we had the Shakespeare plays,
Mm.
to now,
Mm-hmm.
this is an extraordinary drama within an individual life. So you're in a position that in the future, as people look at the trajectory of your own work, will really look extraordinary because you lived that, you embodied that,
Hmm.
and therefore the characters you make, the sort of nonchalance that with which Robbie deals with his secret, which of course is no longer anything like a secret,
Right, right, right.
is really new in and is something that you have particular sort of, that, as I say, you embody it as a person. So of course, as a novelist, it's going to be something really interesting for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, your work reflects your life to some degree or other. And I I don't believe I've ever written a novel only about gay people or primarily about gay people.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
even when things were, even in the bad old days when you could, when you could get arrested for being in a gay bar. Anybody's sexuality is part of a context. Is you're only gay in terms in
Yeah.
terms of people who are not gay.
Um,
If we were all gay, it wouldn't be an issue at all. But
is it
I
possible?
don't hold out any hope for that, or really any
No,
desire.
I don't know. Is it possible that you saw Isabel from your novel Day on the subway, that you were going on the subway? I'm just inventing this. I have no information.
Hmm.
But you were on the
Hmm.
subway and you saw someone and you thought, I think I know what I could do with that sort of presence, with that sort of aura. She's clearly going to work.
Yeah,
She clearly
yeah,
has
yeah,
children. She
yeah.
clearly, is
Yes,
that possible?
um, yes, but certainly with Isabel, it worked in reverse. I wonder if this happens to you too. I sort of had her character fairly firmly in mind. I could see her sort of losing it on the subway, and then a month later, I see her losing it on the subway in the form of another woman who is not, of course, Isabel, but might as well be.
And I mean, I suppose what I'm asking really is, how do novels begin? Now, I know it's a stupid
Ah,
question, and I'm just wondering, in other words, a phrase, a rhythm, a piece of broken glass on the street,
mhm,
and
mhm, mhm.
someone saying something to you, nothing. That a novel comes, that it isn't that poetry makes nothing happen, it's that nothing makes poetry happen.
Right,
And
right,
so
right.
like, could you just give me some version
Sure,
of, yeah.
sure, sure. I mean, this is the question I want to ask every novelist I find.
Yeah, I know I have you here.
How do you get from nothing to the first something that led to the next something, and then there's a novel? I have to say that this novel, Day, was unusual for me in that I started with the structure. I never start with structure. I start with bits and pieces, and I don't know what. Yeah, yeah, a shard of glass, somebody laughing at a party, and it begins to turn into something. The particular quality of this novel is I felt that I couldn't write a contemporary novel without including the pandemic. It was I started writing it right after lockdown. I not only wasn't going to write a novel in some fantasy world in which this wasn't happening. um, there was no place on the planet in which to set a novel where it wasn't happening. It was happening everywhere. You could, if you had the conscience for it, ignore the Vietnam War in the U.S. You could ignore the AIDS epidemic. Where are you gonna put a novel where the pandemic hadn't touched? So for this book, I was struggling with the question of how to deal with the pandemic. That seems a little mild for Godzilla trampling your village, but wasn't about the pandemic. Novels are not, of course, about viruses. They're about human beings, and this one really started with the idea of a day divided into three parts: before, at the height of, and in the aftermath. And that's the first time for me. And probably never again. But particular times require particular measures.
Um, I was at an academic meeting and someone mentioned the diurnal novel. Have you heard the phrase?
No, but
Yeah.
I'm eager to.
There's someone saying, well, there's another diurnal novel, and I sat up for a minute. What diurnal novel? And Ulysses obviously is one. We
Wow.
have what Mrs. Dalloway has to be another, and then there's another one by an Indian I can't remember the name of. But
Mm,
could you talk to me about that idea of that very strong literary tradition of day? What day means?
day. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh wow, the diurnal novel.
Yeah.
Hmm, always good when they have a name for something. For reasons I can't fully explain, one of the things that just slayed me about Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway in particular, to the lighthouse, was the sense that I had sort of grown up with the idea that a great novel spanned a great period. That in order for a novel to be great, it had to be outwardly enormous. It had to be 800 pages and traverse nations and eras. And then I went and picked up Virginia Woolf, specifically Mrs. Dalloway, and I was just fascinated by the notion that if most serious writers until then had been sort of, let's say, aiming their telescopes up at the constellations and trying to record their movements, what about aiming your microscope at the subatomic, which is equally mysterious and equally revelatory, just on a different physical scale? And when I say I can't account for, I think we all have certain inclinations that we can't quite explain, but that just thrilled me. The idea that you could find something enormous in a particle, in something outwardly small.
And I think that's the part of the greatness of your book is that idea that you can find things domestically, that you can find things in time, and out of that confinement, I suppose it's not confinement is not the word as much as it seems like a small canvas until the characters begin to move,
Yeah,
and then of course all life takes place.
yeah,
In a single encounter, you can find huge resonance and reverberation in that stairway, in the possibility of that small room being made into an even smaller one. Something very large can emerge, which is, of course, to do with loss. It's to do with hope. It's to do, well, these are two large words, really. It's to do with the way in which those individuals seem so single, so
yeah,
there, so present. And it's not that they're larger than the spaces; it is that their presence, I think, emerges all the stronger because of the way in which the day has been confined.
yeah, yeah. Well,
And
um, although I couldn't quite say why I am so drawn to trying to find the large within the outwardly small. I started out to be a painter and wasn't really very good at it. But one of the things I learned trying to paint was that for mysterious but sort of physically embedded reasons, your hand moves across a canvas in a certain way, and you are born as a visual artist with a certain sense of scale. Like you paint big, you paint small, you paint very small. It's the physics of your attention. And if you are a painter who needs to paint small canvases, that big canvas will feel diffuse and attenuated. And if you're a big painter who tries to paint small, almost invariably that small painting will feel claustrophobic.
That's an
It's
absolutely
just
marvelous
our
description.
minds seem to work.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on this book. As you know, I didn't just enjoy it immensely. I got a lot from it. It has a lot of hidden energies and moments of great beauty. And congratulations and thank you for talking to me. And it was
Thank you.
quite
Thank you.
enjoyable.
You are a moment of great beauty, and it's lovely to talk to you.